I think you're attributing a little too much to me, but I'll let you just enjoy my hipsterness for a couple seconds before I get started. 5 years of CSS Day. Until last year, I co-organized, and it saddens me that they're actually doing better without me. I need some applause. Who likes food? All right, cool. I learned a lot today, and from Mark, I want to show you something that I learned. You were talking about grid, and I thought, I'm going to come up with the coolest new grid. The problem I have with grids is they're always too rigid, like you said, with the 12 columns. And I have a grid for this slide deck. It's 2,560 columns without gutters. So I'll show you the grid overlay. Looks like that. So the cool thing about this grid is everything always lines up with the grid. For those of you who don't know who I am, which is usually the case, my name's Steven. I'm head of UX at an auction platform called Katawiki nowadays. And the marketing team would probably enjoy it if I made the logo bigger. So can someone tweet this? Because my team thinks I'm in a coffee shop right now. No? All right. Let's talk about MySpace. Who remembers MySpace? All right. An old crowd. So MySpace, before, Facebook wasn't really a thing at the time. MySpace was a big thing. And the cool thing, the thing people liked about MySpace is they could be really creative with pages, so they could make stuff like this. Yeah. Nice. Woo! Yee. It's like scary stuff. Now you kind of know what happened to MySpace, I guess. So there was this guy on MySpace. Many of you probably know this story. There's a guy named Samy. About, I think 12 years ago, he was 19 years old. And he was looking at the profile, and he saw the relationship status that you could give. And he was in a relationship. But like all of us, he wanted to be in a hot relationship. So what he did was he just tinkered around, he figured out a way to change that relationship status to in a hot relationship. And a lot of the techniques he used to do that led to him coming up with some other little trickery, which is now known as the world's most widespread worm, if you count being in one social network a worm. So it kind of worked like this. He had a profile page, and when certain people in certain browsers would look at this profile page, then they would favorite his page and put him in their profile as a friend, and there would be this text, but most of all, Samy is my hero. And it would copy that code to their profile, so people who looked at their profile, the third person who came along, you'll notice it's starting to look like a worm, somewhat, kind of, maybe. So, but most of all, Samy is my hero. This spread, he thought he'd get maybe a couple hundred extra followers, but about 20 hours later, he had more than 1 million followers, and MySpace had to shut everything down to figure things out. So it was kind of a big deal, and he didn't mean to do anything by it, but the interesting thing about this is how he implemented it. This was he put the JavaScript in the background, CSS background. And you can't do this anymore, luckily, in modern browsers, but he was able to do this. And 2 years ago, this article came up that said only 47% of all websites are vulnerable to this, as of 2 years ago. So that's kind of crazy. But Samy didn't have evil intentions. He was just kind of a kid playing around, just wanted to see what he could get away with, what he could do. He didn't mean to hurt anyone or put down the whole network. So that was Samy. But There are lots of bad people in the world. And I'm going to be talking about people who are bad people and people who do bad things. Sometimes they go together. Some of it's about security, but I'm not a security expert. For me, this talk was like an exploration into something that I really knew nothing about, but I thought was really interesting, and how that pertains to CSS. So you could say I went kind of down this rabbit hole of, I'm not going to point all these things out to you. You're going to have to see them. But what I found is there's these different levels of evil. I didn't know there was so much. I didn't think you could do that much with CSS, outside of the stuff that I know about within UX, which I'll be talking about as well. But let's just get started with some of it. So, getting browser history. So some of you might know that if you have a website, such as weirdbutdead.com, and you put some links on it, you move those links off screen, and when a visitor comes and they visited some of those sites, those links change color, and you use getComputedStyle, and then you can figure out which sites in that list of links that you have on your site, which sites have they visited before. So, for example, I don't know why you would do that, but I guess if you want to see if someone is going to competitor websites or whatever, then you could do something like this. But you can't do it anymore because modern browsers have fixed that. So I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking, Stephen, can we do the same thing with Boolean algebra and mixed blend mode? And yes, you can. You can. In fact, someone who I think has no free time and no social life did exactly that. So I'll show you. I'll give you an example of this. This is okay. Oops, you're now seeing all my stuff here. How do I get that over there? All right. Can you see that whack-a-mole thing? If I hit that, then you see, well, it's kind of hard to read. It says, all done, websites you visited, none. Are you in incognito? In fact, I am. And these are the websites that are not visited. And this is kind of insane. I can look at that one. What this person did was made a table with all possible combinations of these links and whether you visited them, yes or no. So there's a class not visited and a class, a class not visited and a class visited. And if you've actually visited, some of these links are black and some of them are white, and they use mixed blend mode multiply. So let me just run over a few of these and you can see what I mean, how many there are. They're all over the place here. So if I were to have, let's say I would have had the combination of links visited and unvisited for this particular cell right here, this is a table, then that would be the one with the mole. Because then when the combination's right, then the background will be white because you won't have the multiplication throughout those layers, and then you would have the mole there. So really, every single combination of links visited and not visited in this particular list, you can get someone to click on that, and then if you have a little bit of JavaScript, they're actually sending you to your site which links they visited in that list. This is pretty ridiculous. I don't think you have to worry about it very much that anyone's going to do this, because if you have a long list of links, it used to be with the getComputedStyle thing, you could do thousands of links in a very short time, but you don't have to worry about that as much. So this is kind of evil, but maybe not that evil. So when I was researching for this talk, Mathias, who was the MC yesterday, he had given this talk, this Belgian kid. he'd given a talk a few times about lots of different weird things in CSS, and a few of those weird things had to do with security, and one of these was stealing data from the DOM. And the way he explained this was like this. Let's say you have this hidden input, and you've got this token value, and you want to know what it is. You can use CSS that starts with the very first string or character in that string, and then do that like again and again and again until you get, with a very large bit of CSS, you can kind of guess what that token is or figure it out. So it's basically pulling in it's calling a background from your server, so you could see what did it call, and then figure out what that token is. So pretty evil, kind of, yeah? Maybe? You see it every day? Another thing that he talked about was text symbol leaking. So in a similar way, instead of pulling something out from an attribute with an attribute selector, you can get actual content from the DOM, like this, using Unicode range. So with the Unicode range, you can specify one specific character, and you can make a font face a declaration for every single character, and then have that be something that you call from another server, and then figure out that way what the content of that particular element is. Also, probably not the greatest shortcut, but it's possible, and it's pretty evil, I think. I read something about actually having dictionary fonts, which isn't really CSS, but you can have a whole word put together in one as one character in a font, and just have a whole font with all these words in it, and then test that way. Just keep brute force testing if one of those words is the password. Maybe yesterday we heard what the most common passwords were, so we don't even need to do that. And then something that works sometimes in some cases, which is forcing expressions, which was what Samy used, of course, to have an expression in your CSS, which allows you to put JavaScript in your CSS. So to do that, you would have a meta tag like this, where you just basically say it's IE7, and then if it's in Quarks mode, then you're golden, and you can pull in the page thing. So related to that is the path relative style sheet import, which is, anyone heard of this before? No? Oh, good. So some sites use things like PHP, and let's say you have some kind of a forum or blog platform or whatever, and if you have this type of relative link to a style sheet, so not with a certain path, but just a relative, and you put something like this in your post, say in a forum post, this is using an expression, and then you call this link, that's, you see post.php and then slash. If you're in combination with a browser in Quarks mode, like similar to the previous example, then this sometimes will give you, it'll look for post.php / styles.css instead of example.com/styles.css. And what that'll do is then return the page, which has CSS in it, and it's ignoring everything else that's not CSS, and then it's running this JavaScript actually as CSS. So that's pretty evil stuff. It doesn't work everywhere, so you'd have to have really old sites, and this particular combination of browser and Quarks mode and being able to run expressions. So a deeper level of evil is content replacement. So on some sites like MySpace, I think in MySpace they were able to steal like 35,000 passwords this way. You just hide something like the menu, and then you just reconstruct your own and add your styles, and then link it to whatever you want, make a fake login page, and then get everybody's credentials. So the lesson here is don't allow people to put styles in their input. And I know what you're thinking, Stephen, we would never do that. We use classes. We have class-based frameworks and things like that. But you don't want to do that. So UI redressing, also known as clickjacking, and this is weird. Naming is weird in our industry, as I found out, and in security it's even weirder. So you have clickjacking. If you do the same thing with keystrokes, they call it stroke jacking. I feel like I just violated the code of conduct even saying it. Pretty weird stuff. So if you want to see the equivalent of what just happened with style, LinkedIn had this about 2 years ago. Someone found this exploit where you can use a style that's on the platform itself. So when we're making style sheets, we're often thinking about our own use cases and not that someone else might be able to use it. So this particular style, it's kind of a weird name for the style, for the class, but this is like one of the many ways that someone would just have something take over the entire screen, like an overlay or whatever. And LinkedIn had this blogging platform that you can type something in, and you were able to add classes. And so they just used a class that was on LinkedIn. So you don't have any cross-domain problems or anything. It's just one of the classes that legally you were allowed to use. They didn't scope it. So the JSON payload that got sent back that would publish the article could be something like this, where you basically have this overlay over the entire screen that's kind of transparent, or you could put an image in there or whatever and link it to another site. So what I would do in that situation, because now I'm kind of this hipster hacker person, I'll show you. I've just made my own little spoofy LinkedIn page. It's really easy because we have dev tools. And if you've ever seen these spoof pages, sometimes they look really crappy, and I don't understand because you just go to the real page. We'll just take that form out of there. It's pretty easy. And then I'm kind of remembering all the stuff I did here, which isn't very much. Just take that out. And at the top, you've got that cookie bar, right? We could misuse that. This is great. I'll just watch my own work. When I'm done, it's gonna look exactly like the LinkedIn page, believe it or not. So if you make a login page, for those of you who are planning on making fake login pages, you need to make it look like their session just expired or something like that, and it can't be very suspicious. And it has to actually look like the platform. For some reason, some sites just throw you out, your session's gone, and you might not think it's very suspicious if you have to log back in. Then again, you might. But we just misuse the cookie bar here, and then we use, for the height, I kind of guesstimated the heights of things, and then it's just 100 VW minus the amount that I think that I needed. So. And hopefully it's responsive. So then just save this from the browser, save as web page, and then put that on your own server, and then you're done. And you have your spoofed site. So that's pretty evil of me, isn't it? So then you get something like this. And then they log in. You have to change a couple things, of course, to get their credentials. So another really, really evil thing is phishing. Phishing, I think, is more evil than the previous ones. And the reason is so many people how many people have been in a phishing, they've been victim to a phishing attack? Anyone? No? Do you know no normal people? I've met lots of people who got into these things. Maybe phishing's gotten a lot better, but I'm used to seeing stuff like this, that I don't expect people to fall for this. This is supposedly from Apple. I'm not buying it personally. But this one, I don't know. This is a recent one that was here in the Netherlands, and I actually know someone who thought this was real, clicked on the button, and then suddenly they got a notice that a lot of things were being bought with their credit card. So these things really do work, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about them. Actually, the better they are, the more people, as Chris said yesterday, lots of people fall for these. So the more complex you get with constructing these types of phishing emails, the higher the chance that people are going to click on them. Now here you've got up there your account and the queue and help. Any of these links that you click on could all link to the same place. So because you have so many, there's even more chance that people will click on them. So this kind of thing, they have spear phishing attacks where you could say, we know everyone we target specifically Netflix people, and then that's kind of more of a spear phishing attack or in one organization. And then you could really tailor-make these things. And they even say that when you do really good targeted spear phishing, that like the chances up to 80% that people will click on one of the links in the email, which is kind of shocking. So we have one thing going for us right now, is that lots of people aren't really good designers who do this type of thing, and they make a lot of mistakes in their grammar and their text and things like that. Like Chris said yesterday, 45% of these that are well designed, people will click on, and 3% even click on the poorly designed ones. So good design works even for bad, evil purposes. All right? I think one of the highest levels of evil that we can do are dark patterns. And I was talking to Chris Coyer yesterday, and I had this at the beginning. Dark patterns was one of the first ones. But I think it's even more evil, and he made a good point. He said, it's evil because they're right there. Dark patterns are something that you can use even if you don't mean to be evil. You just want to try to make things convert better. You're under a lot of pressure, so there are a lot of reasons that you might use dark patterns, right? And the thing I like about user experience is that because it's about people, it's about behavior, it's about psychology, because people are kind of unpredictable in ways, but they're also very, very predictable in other ways. And you get to know these things, and you get to learn a lot about how people use a particular product or a platform. And the more you learn, the more tempting it might be to do some pretty bad stuff. And in a way, that's worse than those attacks that we just saw that might happen but probably won't. Because browser makers can fix things in browsers, and you can follow things like headers with X-frame options deny, and using a correct doc type, and things like that to kind of mitigate the chance that those types of attacks will happen. But you can't really do a whole lot about dark patterns. They're all over the place, and they'll have some effect on you, sometimes whether you like it or not. So Harry Brignall, oh wait, that's Houdini. Harry Brignall has he's the one who came up with the term dark patterns, and dark patterns have become more and more of an issue that we're talking about, and a lot of it has to do with style. So you're basically doing things with CSS, designing things to trick people. Fast Company even called 2016 the year that dark patterns won. So if you're not familiar with dark patterns, there's this website, darkpatterns.org. And on darkpatterns.org, you've got the Hall of Shame, which is basically tweets that people put out whenever they find an example of a dark pattern, and they hashtag it, then it gets posted here. And you also have the types of dark patterns, everything from forced continuity to privacy zuckering, as it's called, sneaking things into the basket. If you don't know a lot about dark patterns, because you're just a developer, and yesterday I realized there's like one designer here, it's worth looking at because it's kind of fun and it's kind of creepy in a way. Once you start seeing, you're like, I recognize that from like 1,000 different websites. And one of these things, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of these things is called Roach Motel. Anyone know the Roach Motel commercials? They were in the States. It's like you have cockroaches. We don't have cockroaches here that much, I guess, but in the States, in California, you had like monster cockroaches. They fly, right? You have flying cockroaches. So we had like all different kinds of variations of cockroaches. And a Roach Motel is just this little box that now is called a motel. And the roaches go in because there's some stuff in there that they like, apparently. And it's kind of like an adhesive, so they can't leave. And they have different versions. So they have some that if they touch it, they go back to their nest and all of them die. But usually, the Roach Motel is you go in and you can't go out, you can't get out. And I think that was like the slogan. They had a jingle, a Roach Motel. You go in, but you can't go out. Or, I don't know, something like that. I hope you enjoyed that singing interlude. So an example is this. I use an e-commerce site here in the Netherlands. It's kind of like, it's called bol.com. It's like kind of like Amazon, but just for the Dutch market. And I don't know if anyone here works there. But if you do, then this is an opportunity. Okay? So I wanted to unsubscribe from a newsletter that I had never subscribed to, or probably had subscribed to because there was something checked that I didn't see, and then when I pressed submit, it was checked. So I clicked unsubscribe in this email. So I got the email. In the email, there was an unsubscribe link. I clicked on it, and this is what I got. And this is in Dutch, so I'll explain it to you for if you don't read Dutch. It says bol.com newsletter. Do you want less mails? Put your email address in here, and then you can sign off from the mails. But notice what's going on here. There are a few things happening here that are deceptive. Someone call one out.
Yeah, you can't see if you subscribe or unsubscribe.
Yeah, that's the big one, right? I'm thinking, okay, I just clicked unsubscribe, so I'm in the unsubscribe flow right now. That's my whole train of thought is unsubscribing. And now there are these things that I can check off, which I might think, if I check them off, I'm unsubscribing from them, right? But actually, the button says save your preferences. And here, they're asking you for your email address. Almost every unsubscribe email that I've ever seen, when you click on it, they know exactly what email address it is. So that's a distraction maneuver as well. Why would you ask someone for their email? You just sent them an email at that address. So these are things. There might be a technical reason for that email input field, but the checkboxes, that's an evil thing. Basically, what you need to do here is you need to fill in your email address, do nothing else, and then click the button. And that's how you unsubscribe from the email. So it's not what you would expect as a user, and it is a dark pattern. So that's your opportunity, whoever's out there. This is what you get. You've now changed your preferences, they've been saved, and you will not receive any commercial email anymore. So that's fine, that's good. So I was like, whew, I did the right thing. And then I got this email, which says, hello, sir, we've received your preference for not wanting to receive any newsletters, and because it takes so long to, process that, you might receive a couple more of those emails. So, and they also have an unsubscribe link, so you can go back to that thing and have the chance that you might accidentally subscribe on the unsubscribe page. So that's an interesting thing, right? Here's another one: misdirection. Misdirection. If you've ever seen a magician working, a misdirection is actually you're focusing attention on something that's happening, And in reality, something else is happening entirely. The main action is the thing that you're not paying attention to, right? I like this painting. I use it a lot. What I always wonder in this painting, by the way, is what the hell is that kid doing right there? You know, it's kind of weird. So here's an example of misdirection. Just take a look at that for a second. It's just CSS. Are you sure you want to unsubscribe? We know what primary calls to action are, right? You don't have to be a designer or a UX person to know what that is. You know that you expect the primary call to action, the thing that gets the most attention, you expect that to do the thing for which you came to that page or screen in the first place. And this is obviously a blatant, it's a very simple example. There are a lot more subtle examples, but this kind of confuses people. You know, you start, I call that the UI terror loop, where you just kind of keep revolving around and you don't know what to look at and you're not sure what you can do here. But it's a good example. Confirmation of desired behavior, which doesn't have anything to do with CSS, but I think it's really pertinent to the topic. Everyone knows if you have this choice, yes or no. You want to do something or you don't. That's a clear choice, right? What about this one? Yes, not right now. The implication is that you're confirming that you will do it, but not right now. And here's another one from the wild. Yes, maybe later. These kind of things happen all the time. You're changing the wording. You've ever had a telemarketer on the telephone and they're just asking you questions like, are you having a good day? Is your last name this? They start with these things you just can't say no to, and you keep saying yes and saying yes. The chance that you'll do this in the future is proven to be higher because you didn't say no, you said maybe, or you said yes, I'll do it, but I'll do it later on. So these are very subtle psychological things that really, really work. They've been tested, and you would be shocked at the significance of the tests that have been done in this area. So confirmation wording is very dangerous as well. So these are significant differences. Another thing is exploiting behavioral patterns, and Harry had this great example from Snapchat. This is you've seen lots of timers and things like that on websites that are designed to create some kind of urgency, but this one is completely fake. It's just an animation, and it just keeps. If you wait for it, it'll just start over. It means absolutely nothing. It's supposed to make you feel kind of like you have to hurry up, and that's the only purpose of it, right? So these are just a few examples. And what it says is that people who stand to gain something from you have motive to deceive you. And unfortunately, just as we can do it with packaging, with advertising, CSS just happens to be the visual thing. It's the way that we do all these types of tricks. You can make something have more or less attention with CSS. As we've seen earlier, you can use CSS variables to do some nasty things. You can use old browser bugs to do nasty things with CSS. And probably the scariest things you can do with CSS are the things that you're supposed to do with CSS in the first place, but just doing that with evil intentions. So I'll show you one more, which is when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. But then I thought about it, it should be possible. How do you get someone to run a command in their terminal on their computer from your website? So some of you might have seen this, but if you look at this little bit right here, right, this command, well, you're all developers, you know what this does, right? But you go to Stack Overflow, or, well, not Stack Overflow, but you go to some guy's site or girl's site who wrote a tutorial, you copy the code, you paste it into your terminal, and then you get something like that. Just arbitrary code execution. So how they did that was actually, why didn't I think of that? This is pretty clear what they did. Just hide the stuff and make it so you can't select it. You can't select it. You can select it, but you can't see the selection, right? So then when you paste it, it's got everything with it. And that's what the code looks like. So this is all these things. I'll post the slides, and then you'll have lots to read. There are lots of links in there. But this is the one that really took the cake, I think. Anyone ever seen this before? Yeah, a few? Okay. Yeah, that kind of freaked me out when I saw it. So now you know what you need to do, right? When you get email, just avoid phishing, write a script that converts all your email to plain text and then sends it to a virtual machine, and then, I'm kidding. And then always, when you copy-paste, paste it in your text editor first. That's probably a good piece of advice. CSS is becoming a bigger thing. It's we have almost as many modules in CSS now as we had properties in the very beginning, I think. So it's becoming this huge system, and as we all know, systems get more complicated, and when they get more complicated, you can't see from all sides anymore, and so there are more and more things possible that you might not even notice. All right, so I have to wrap up here. So what's the takeaway here? There's none. There's absolutely no takeaway whatsoever. And PPK said, well, okay, as long as you end on a positive note. So is there a positive message in all of this? I don't think so, really. Doing this process of kind of preparing this, going down this rabbit hole for this talk, I just realized that the world is full of bad things and bad people, and it's evil, and it's depressing, and it's dark, and you all just have to learn how to deal with it. So, have a nice day.
That was, I guess, the most uplifting end ever. So this is what you do nowadays?
Nope.
No, okay. So, I teach my students not to do this stuff, right? We teach them to do good. But I guess on some schools, marketing schools come to mind, this is taught as using CSS as good. Don't you think so? Because they are implemented. Some people think this is a good idea.
Yeah, they do. They're under a lot of pressure as well. It's all about conversion, and if you work in an organization where you do a lot of testing, which is probably a lot of you, like A/B testing, it's all about conversion and metrics, and there's a lot of pressure to perform better. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a good book by Trina Falba, who spoke at Design Day a couple of years ago, called White Hat UX. And they actually talk a lot about, she talks a lot about black hat and gray hat UX as well. And you kind of get an insight into what those things are and why people do them. And Harry Brignall has given talks that you can find on the web about the why, why people do this kind of stuff. Because in the end, they're just trying to get more people to use their products, and they're just going about it in a way that's kind of, it's relying on trickery. And good UX actually makes things easier for people. If you want to sell chocolate cake, you might as well sell it to the people who really want chocolate cake. So the purpose of, your focus should be, how do I find those people and let them know that they can get what they want, with our company or whatever. And so BJ Fogg has said that by increasing simplicity, you increase the ability of the user. And I think that if you make things easier to do, if you focus on just giving people what they came for, then the people who want that thing will come to it, and any gain you get by getting people to your platform who are going to be tricked into there, they're not going to stay very long, so it's always a short-term gain.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of emphasis on short-term, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of business is short term, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I'm always wondering is, so I think more people should know this, except for marketers and lawyers. How do we achieve that?
I feel like I'm about to break the code of conduct again. No. You just have to no. Yeah, I don't know. I think what you need to do is educate everybody about stuff like that, because once people know that kind of trickery can be used, if we've all learned a little bit more about how telemarketers work, and if they kind of go into their little thing, their script, then we kind of all know what that script is and the little tricks they do, and the more we learn about it, the less we fall for it. So I think part of it is just have as many people know as possible.
Okay, yeah. Any ideas how to do that?
Like give talks about it.
Okay.
And
share videos about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So what if you work in a team and you are under a lot of pressure, and suddenly somebody comes up with a brilliant evil idea and you don't want to implement it?
just say, nope, not going to do it. It's hard to say because some people don't realize that they're doing dark patterns. They think, like that little animation, they think, oh, that's just going to give that feeling of urgency, you know, and no one's really thinking about what effect. They're thinking about the psychological effect. They read some kind of report or something that kind of thing works, and they think it might be technically too hard to implement a real timer or whatever. Yeah, I would just, you have to have lots of arguments, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because, well, it's obvious you can say, well, just quit your job, but I think it's not that easy for everybody to get a new job, right, or to just quit.
No. What you could come up with an alternative that works better, and that's the advantage of testing as much as you can, is that you can prove with data that one idea is better than another. The problem with dark patterns is that they perform really well. So you, yeah, just, can we scratch that out of the video? That's why people do them, is because they work, right?
And they're fun to make as well, right? Oh, wow, we get to make animations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you could also think about how could we use a principle, like a psychological principle, but in a way that's not bad for the user. At the company, we just had a test where we had a link that you can buy and sell. It's an auction platform. So we had this link that kind of invites you to become a seller, but it's just like, hey, want to become a seller? But so we changed the text and we changed the location, and we made it kind of subtle because you're in this buying flow, so you don't want to be confronted with selling, but just put a text there like, do you maybe have items that you'd like to sell? Which is a little bit different than start selling. It's kind of, it gets people to think about, hey, oh yeah, maybe I'm looking at this stuff, but I might have stuff I could put on here. So it's using some psychological principles, but it's not interrupting the flow, and it's not forcing anyone, it's not tricking anyone to do anything. It's just more inviting for the people who are interested in that, and that worked really well. So it's using kind of similar principles, but just helping the people out who really want to do that particular thing, and not just trying to trick a mass of people to do something that they don't want to.
Okay, thanks. Do you have any last things to say to the...
I was kidding about the depressing, dark stuff.
Really?
No, if I were to say one last thing about the conference so PPK doesn't kill me for being too negative at the end, I would just think about all the stuff that you've learned in the last 2 days and take that with you, and hopefully that inspires you to go out and do even greater stuff than you've already been doing. So enjoy it and be happy and flowers and tulips and
we'll have a drink. Thank you, Stephen.
thanks so much, man.